regulation updates from Vermont Fish and Wildlife on fishing practices have been good for the health of the fish population and the enjoyment of fishing for anglers. Anglers, or if you don't know, it's another term saying fishermen. Licensing. Lifetime license. I couldn't find much when pricing of when it first came out, but people have told me that around 2001, when it did become a thing, that it was $100 for an infant under 1 year old. And but now, if you're under 1 year old, it's 8 times the adult price of a license, which would be $224. And if you're 1 to 15, it is 16 times, which is $448. If you're 16 to 24, it is 31 times the adult price, which is $868. And then if you're 25 to 66, it drops to 26 times the adult price and is $728. Again, I couldn't find prices for the 2001 because I've looked everywhere and didn't find them. I even contacted a biologist, state biologist, and he couldn't find it either. But rules and regulations. So northern pike. In 1991, rules and regulations made it so you just caught a pike, you can just like kill it and just get rid of it because they were considered a trash fish. And now there's rules and regulations that stop it, and you can only keep five a day that are at least 20 inches long. And that season is the same as trout season, which runs the second Saturday in April to October 31st. Then bass season, it's got more common to catch bass in the recent years. That season starts June 12th and ends November 30th. Daily limits. All the fish were getting overfished, and they made rules and regulations, daily limits to stop just keeping every single fish you catch. That was a while ago, but now, depending on which area you're fishing, that has different guidelines, different daily limits, size restrictions. So you need the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Fishing Guide and Regulations, and in the back of that has all the places you can fish, sizes, everything. Ice fishing. In 1991, with ice fishing, you could have 15 poles in the water per person, and no matter what body of water. But now it is 8 poles in the water per person, unless you're on Champlain, which you can have 15 poles down. And the main bait people use for ice fishing is bait fish, live bait. And as you can see here, Vermont is split up into eastern and western zone now. It used to be you just get a permit, you go to the store and buy your bait, and then they write you a permit for whichever lake you're going to fish on. And then that permit is valid for 48 hours. But now, recently, they switched it to eastern and western zone, which a permit is good for the eastern or western, and it's now valid for 10 days instead of 48 hours. And the permits, if you're planning on fishing in blacklist water, which is a body of water that shares either 2 states or 2 countries, which Magog shares Canada and the United States. If you plan on going there, you can only use the bait there instead of moving it all around. And now you can catch your own bait in the river, and you just go on the Vermont Fish and Wildlife website and then get your permit there. And fines. These haven't changed much from $19.91. It's $25 for every fish that you are over the daily limit or under the size restriction. Say you're going ice fishing, you're allowed 50 perch a day, and if you're catching a bunch, it's easy to lose count. And say you keep 55 instead of 50, that would be a $125 fine you'd have to pay, which is can add up quickly. Endangered or threatened species. In 1991, if you harmed an endangered species, it was a $1,000 fine, but now it is a $2,000 fine. And if you do catch one, you have to release it immediately. You can't keep it out of the water, take pictures. You need to keep it in the water, cut the hook off, and let it go. And if it is a sturgeon or a sauger, you need to report the sighting of it to the Vermont Fish and Wildlife so they can keep track of them, because they are endangered. List of endangered species. We've got lake sturgeon, stonecat, eastern sand darter, channel darter, northern brook lamprey, and American brook lamprey. If you don't know what a lamprey is, it's basically like a leech, but has a bunch more teeth and it's longer, and they focus on mostly fish. Threatened species, you got muskellunge or muskie, sturgeon, and sauger. Most popular species of fish for. You got rainbow trout, brown trout, and brook trout, which most people use either fly rods to catch or spinning rods. And lake trout, people mostly use spinning rods because they like deeper, colder water, and with fly rods you normally is just fishing on the top water fishing. Salmon, if you're going for salmon in rivers, then you can use a fly rod, and I guess in lakes too, but mostly in rivers. And you can use a spinning rod for that too. And you got northern pike. They are same as like lake trout, they like deeper water, colder. So you mostly use spinning rod for that. With largemouth and smallmouth bass, you use bait casters, which is a more complex reel. And you can also use spinning reel. In 1991, the main focus for fish were rainbow trout, brook trout, brown trout, lake trout, and salmon. But now, it's that same list, but you add 3 more, which are northern pike, smallmouth bass, and largemouth bass. Okay, so this one right here, that is a brown trout. They look similar to brook trout, but with brook trout, as you see right beneath it, has a very red stomach, reddish pink. And brown trout have a more like yellowish, very light brown stomach. That's the easiest way to tell them apart. Then rainbow just has a pink stripe down the middle, down the center of it. Then right here, you got the lake trout, which some people mistake lake trout and salmon because they do look alike a little. But the salmon, which is right here, is like brownish on top and then goes to silver down lower right here. And the head is also more like rounded than the lake trout right here, which bumps right there. And they're also a lot more brown. Then you got the northern pike, which the tail is a lot different because these fins right here are a lot bigger than lake trout. And also they have bigger teeth. You'll know if you get bit, they hurt. And then you got smallmouth and largemouth bass. An easy way to tell these two apart are the smallmouth bass are a lot more like bronze. I'm not quite sure why, but they are. Then you got the largemouth, which is more green and then fades to white. And also on the smallmouth, there's a jawline. The eye is in line with the jawline. And then with largemouth, the jawline is further back from the eye, showing it has a larger mouth. Where to fish for trout, salmon, and northern pike? Trout and salmon you mostly catch in rivers and most lakes around. With salmon, they're not in as many rivers as trout, but they are in the Willoughby River, Clyde River, Lake Memphremagog, and Lake Champlain, and a lot more lakes, but not many more rivers. The trout are in most rivers around, even in streams behind your house. There's most likely brook trout in it. And for northern pike, they can't really live in rivers because they need a lot of fish to feed off of. So you catch those in Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog and most lakes around. Why people fish? And like about 30 years ago, a lot of people just fished for food. It's relaxing, and it's a way to socialize away from everyone with one other person or so. But now, in most recent years, a lot more people have gone to the sport side of it. Tournaments like bass tournaments, either goes by how much accumulated weight you have, or the biggest bass, or how many, like that. That's what bass fishing mostly is mostly for sport, because they give a big, good bite, and they're just fun to catch. You got fly fishing pole, fly fishing reel. You can cast lightweight lures really far. You can buy little flies. I should have showed a picture, but little flies. They're basically lures for the fly fishing pole, and you can whip those out there pretty far, and they're only like 99 cents per fly for the average. And then you can be more delicate with the cast, because you whip it out there, then it's a lightweight, and it just lands on the water carefully and doesn't make a big splash and scare the fish. Here is a fly fishing reel. You can hand that around. But the problem with those is they take a lot of space to cast, because it's a whipping motion. You got to whip it out there pretty far, and it takes a lot of practice to get used to. And it's very long. The pole is 10 feet long, so the line for it is very expensive. So on average around $50 to $60 for a spool of it. It's because it's a hollow line. It's very buoyant on the water, and it just floats. They've changed, because they used to have like an actual handle like this one on the reel, and then they switched to the knob you saw on there. Just turn it. Bait caster. This one is a very complex reel. You gotta adjust the tension every time you switch a lure. You gotta twist this and this so it doesn't bird nest, which I will explain. It's a really smooth reel. If you reel it, it goes really nicely. That's a pro, because it's easy to reel. You have a lot better control over it, and since it takes mostly braided line, it casts really far, and it's very accurate with its casting. In 1991, they weren't as smooth, because they didn't have they had the proper gear ratio, but they added a better gear ratio so it goes smoother. And cons about that is it's very hard to use, especially if you're starting out. You just have to adjust the tension and a bunch of other stuff. And it bird nests if you don't have the tension properly, and then bird nest is just, it tangles up inside the reel, and you have to like pull all the line out and fix the knots. It's miserable to fix. It's very expensive. I got that one it came with a pole, and it was $100. And when I got this one, it came with a pole, and it was only $20. And that, you can't really cast light lures far, because again, the tension is just messes everything with that pole. Spinning reel. This one, when I was talking about the different types of fish, what everybody catches, that was the one that was on every single one, because that is a well-known reel that everybody uses. You can catch any type of fish with it. Easy to use with little practice. You just flip that little bail open, and then hold the line and just throw it out. And normally it's ambidextrous, so if you hold it like this on the pole and reel with your left, if you're righty, and if you're lefty, you just unspin this and turn this. Just take that out, take this out, put that in there, screw this back in. And now it is the left-handed pull. Good, tighten that a little more, but. Okay, you can cast pretty far with those if you have weight on it. And again, they've changed a little bit, just the smoothness of the reel. But the cons, it takes a little while getting like the hang of it, like casting with one hand and stuff like that. It's a bigger reel, so it sometimes just gets in the way more often. And same with the bait caster right there. It has something called backlash. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, that isn't as hard to untangle as the bait caster. Like, there's not many cons about that because everybody uses it. It's a pretty nice reel. This one, the closed face. This one is kind of similar to that, but it has a casing on it. That one is not ambidextrous. That one does not tangle very easily. It's a great starter reel because you just push that button and then just cast it out there and then just start reeling again. And then it just starts reeling in. They get dirty over time, and once they get dirty, it's a whole process to clean out. So you need to unscrew that, take it apart, clean it out. And then it's hard to notice problems early on. Like if you have a spinning reel and there's a knot in the line, you can see that easily, and then you can deal with the problem before it becomes a bigger problem. With that, since it's closed, you can't really see knots in it, and then it's invisible to take apart. Conclusion. Fishing has changed quite a bit in recent years, from licensing to poles. I believe it is for the best of the fish and for the anglers. It protects the fish and helps the future anglers to be able to fish. We've talked about licensing, rules and regulations, endangered species, most popular species to fish for. We showed you how to identify a couple of the most popular fish to catch. Where to fish for those, rivers, lakes, and why people fish, and different poles. That's it. I'd like to thank Tom Silva and Lori Silva, which is not here, for helping me through this whole project. Tom and I, we checked the geography of the Willoughby and Clyde River. We walked up and down it and checked how it's changed and looked at pictures from like 30 years ago. We also talked to other anglers about their fishing experience. And Lori helped me with writing the 10-page paper that was miserable to do. But
at least you're honest. Don't say you really feel it.
No hold back. No hold back at all.
they were a huge help. I couldn't have done it without them. So thank you. And we're excited.
Good job.
So,
Any questions?
yeah, so what's your favorite fish to catch and why?
My favorite fish to catch. Well, I just started getting into
project in the CapStone on sustainable home design, and yeah, let's get started. So this is the overview of what we'll be talking about tonight, and so we'll just kind of go through the issues currently with how homes are being built. designed with. Alright, so my essential question for my project and paper was how can we build homes differently to combat climate change? So climate change is an issue that I think is very prominent and that I care about a lot. And I'm also very interested in home design and always have been. And I think after doing my project and paper, how we design our homes does play a crucial role in combating climate change. So current issues in home design. So first off, heating. So the chart here is how most homes are heated. So the majority of homes in the US are heated with natural gas. And then the next largest component is electrical heating. And so over here is how much CO2 is produced for each of these resources, which is relatively a large amount. Natural gas is much better than coal and other things, but it still produces 0.9 pounds of carbon per kilowatt hour. And over here is about how residential energy, basically for heating, it's about 5% of energy used in the US and 5% of our CO2 emissions. So changing the way that we heat homes would have a really big impact on our CO2 emissions in the US, which is what I focused on the most after discovering that. Size is also, I think, a problem with our homes in the US. Our homes are relatively large, and the homes that are being built currently are above 2,000 square feet on average, which I think is pretty large, and building larger homes takes up more resources, and it takes more energy to heat and take care of and maintain. So that just downsizing the size of our homes would reduce resources needed to heat and things like that. And then another issue that is super common is insulation. So homes lose a lot of heat because most homes are not properly insulated, and I think this is insulating homes properly is an effective way to solve like wasted resources, and it can be done with homes that are already existing and should be done with homes that are being lived in. So benefits of building sustainably. So building sustainably, and I'll go over the methods of how to do it later on, it creates less waste that ends up in landfills, and it also uses materials more responsibly, which is important because we have to conserve our natural resources that we have. It's also pretty cost effective, which I think is important when you're considering changing the way that things are done. If it was a lot more expensive, I think it would be more difficult to build more sustainably, but since it is cost effective and in most situations it's cheaper to build more sustainably, I think that we should be able to implement some of these things that I found in real life easily. And they use sustainable homes that are designed, they use a lot less energy and less materials, so they're cheaper in certain areas. So, for energy solutions, alternatives to gases and electricity and things that produce carbon is solar panels. So they do pay for themselves eventually, and I think this is the most common renewable energy that can be applied on a large scale, and it's relatively reliable, and the efficiency of them have been improving over the years with advancements in technology. So I think that just makes them a more ideal solution to other sources of energy because they are renewable and reliable, and they are more common now than they have been, and I think that they'll continue to grow in popularity. So passive forms of heating and cooling would also reduce energy use from resources like natural gas. So one thing that I looked into a lot was geothermal heating and cooling. So it's passive energy, and below the Earth's surface it stays around 50 to 60 degrees year round. So, one method to take advantage of this is that they build pipes like 30 feet under the ground, and they fill them with fluid, and it circulates throughout your house, so in the summer it can cool it, and in the winter it can help with heating. Like 50 degrees isn't an ideal temperature for inside a house in the winter, but it reduces the heating costs and energy consumption to heat homes with just keeping it at a neutral temperature like that. And then passive solar heating is basically just a fancy way to have your windows face south. It's really cost effective if it's done properly. And just taking advantage of that is very beneficial for reducing energy intake. And then just alternative heating that is reliable is just wood and pellet heating. It's more sustainable than gas, and especially if you replant the trees that you're cutting down. And I think that's just something that people already have, but it should replace natural gas if possible in homes. So the economics of building sustainably. Insulating is a cost-effective solution. Earlier, it shows that it can, if you have a properly insulated house, it can save about 10% on heating use or gas usage. And then advanced framing is a cost-effective way to build houses, and I'll go over that more in depth later on. But it's a building method where you just design carefully and you take advantage of the size of materials, and you try basically to build a house as minimally as possible with it still being structurally sound, and it's pretty effective, and I'll go over that more later on why it is so effective. And then another cost-effective solution is just the window placement. So this is the advanced framing method. So this all shows how it's built minimally, and it also provides, so it's basically larger spacing than what would typically be used in between the walls spaces, and it provides more room for insulation, which is a bonus. And I think it reduces the cost of materials for like an average house by $500 to $1,000, which isn't a ton, but it's still something. And then it reduces labor costs as well. And then because it has more insulation, it reduces heating costs and cooling costs. So this is just a basic example of what it could look like, and it has all the things labeled. And then the envelope design is an interesting design that I came upon that I thought was really neat. Basically it's a house inside of a house, and this is what I used for my home design for my project. So in the summer, as you can see here, the sun doesn't directly hit the house, and it doesn't go through windows, and you can open up windows up top and down there, so it forces air through the basement, which is kind of back to the geothermal heating and cooling, and it circulates air around the house and has hot air escape through the top, which cools the house in the summer. And then in the winter, those windows are supposedly facing south. It takes advantage of the lower sun in the winter, and heat circulates throughout the home through the space in between the house and the outer shell. And so with this design, it can keep a house warm for up to 3 days without sun in the winter. And I did an interview with a woman who actually lived in a home that was similar to an envelope house, and she lived in a relatively small home, but she said it was like so effective that in the winter she was constantly having to open her doors and windows, and like she didn't want to bake in the winter because it would get too hot. So it's a really effective design, and I thought it was really interesting because I haven't seen this before. And, it's just reducing energy use just by the design, the way that you build the house. Going underground is also another method to build more sustainably, so you can end up using less materials because you are underground. But I think this method is most effective for extreme temperatures, like in a desert in the Arctic, because I think in a more neutral area like Vermont, it's not as necessary to like protect yourself from the climate. And I'll go over that again later on when I discuss some of the cons of some of these concepts. But going underground is effective for reducing heating costs because it is in the ground. It takes advantage of geothermal heating and cooling. And they can be built, and I watched some things about how people are building them so it doesn't feel like you're underground when you're actually inside, by having windows on all sides and also having the courtyard out front. Really makes it feel like it's a real normal house when you're inside, which I think is pretty neat. So application. So this is my design for my capstone project. I designed it in SketchUp, and I was unable to add in some things because it was the free version and it would crash whenever I loaded it once I got to this point. But my design's pretty much the envelope design, and the actual living area is about 16 by 20 feet, so it's pretty small. And I kept it open, so as you can see over there, the upstairs and the downstairs are, like, the airflow would be really good, because one of the cons with passive heating is that if you have enclosed rooms, the rooms might not be heated evenly, so different spaces of the house would be different temperatures. So I made it so that would be limited. And then this space out here would basically be like a greenhouse in the summer, and I wanted to add plants, but I couldn't because it wouldn't work. And then there's also a fireplace in the back corner that I included because I think that one of the things with passive heating is it's not always reliable, and if you just have a week of cloudy days, you still need heat. But I made it so it has the south facing windows, so in the winter it would be heated mostly with the sun. And then just a small house uses less materials. And so this house would be relatively efficient in heating itself, and is pretty sustainable compared to most houses. And then I also included solar panels and things like that. And, oh yeah, I also made all the measurements so it could theoretically be built with the advanced raying method. But I didn't include like the individual beams, mostly for aesthetic reasons and stuff, but, yeah. So the cons of some sustainable methods. So the downside of solar panels is the actual production of them produces a kind of large amount of CO2, but for the initial years, it's about 50 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which is 20 times less than coal. So it's still a small amount, but it is something to take into account. But I think they're still much more sustainable than natural gas and other forms of energy that are being used. And they're renewable, which other energy sources are not. And going underground, it can cost more because you are digging a lot underground to actually build the home. And then also, you can have a lot of water problems with them being underground, which is why I think they are better in deserts and extreme climates, because you have less water problems. And they actually have more of an advantage in more extreme climates. And I don't think it would be as worth it in a place like Vermont to build a home underground. So the takeaway. So my takeaway is that building sustainably is good, it's cost effective, it helps the planet, it reduces the cost of people actually living in the homes. And I think just designing our homes differently, would play a huge factor in, fighting global warming. And I think that a lot of people can't afford solar panels or things like that, but if we design homes that people could buy in ways that are more self-sufficient in, heating and cooling themselves, and also use less materials building them so they'd be, more accessible, it would just be like a good step in the right direction. So, yeah, that was my project.
Thank you, Camille. So I bet we have questions.
Yeah, what are your questions for me?
I have quite a few,
Alright.
actually, and I think you did great, and I think it's very exciting to listen to you talk about it with your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And as a builder over the last 40 years, it's changed a lot.
Yeah,
Did you look into green roofs at all? Did you look into
Yeah,
green roofs at all?
I did look into green roofs, I do like them, but I think they're better suited for more urban places than rural, but, yeah, they are very cost effective, they reduce heating and cooling, as well for homes, and I think that they're a good use of space. But yeah, I did look into those subjects.
Yeah, Chicago has the most, claims the largest, they have over 26 acres of green roofs in Chicago now.
Yeah,
If you go to Chicago, it's pretty cool.
yeah.
They have
that
some
is-
amazing green roofs. What about SIPS panels? Did you look into SIPS panels at all? Do you know what SIPS panels are? The Craftsbury Gym is made all of SIPS panels. If you look at the inside of the walls,
Mhm.
it's actually, we went cheap, it's actually the inside of the panel. So it's basically, 2 pieces of plywood with a styrofoam sandwich
Mhm.
in between. And, the Craftsbury Gym will heat itself. When we have a full house at a basketball game,
Yeah,
it requires no energy.
yeah.
It's amazing to think that that whole space, and you can have, there's on the laptop, you can see the, gate close slowly as the temperature rises with all the people in there,
Yeah,
and then the heat from the bodies actually circulates and heats the gym.
wow,
And SIPS panels are made, in great lengths too, you can get them 20 feet long, 16
Yeah.
feet long, and they're very efficient. So that was something I was wondering if you didn't run into that, so,
not since panels, specifically, but, one thing I forgot to mention is like using recycled materials as insulation works well.
Yeah.
So it's a good reuse of materials that wouldn't be used otherwise.
Yep. But no, I think you did great, and are you going to college first of all?
Yeah,
And are you gonna study building or design or architecture or anything, or you're not?
no, but
No?
I do want to,
We'll say what your major is.
well, right now my major is Sustainable Landscape Horticulture, which is basically designing
Yeah.
everything except for buildings.
Cool.
But I do wanna build my own home, and I think that the design that I made would be something that I would be interested in actually bringing to life, cause I really like it, and I think it would be really nice to live in, and it's pretty, so, yeah.
So that's my question. So 320 square feet,
Yeah,
right? Is
well,
No.
just the base living area, but I
Oh.
don't know the total, I didn't count, I don't
Like
remember
the
the total.
footprint.
Because it's
Yeah.
got a second.
But there was a loft or something?
Yeah.
in
Yeah, there's
addition?
an upstairs open.
So it's kind of a tiny house.
It's
It
small.
is,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's small.
Yeah. So, any thoughts about, I mean, one of my favorite shows to watch is Tiny House Nation.
Yeah.
What is
Tiny House Nation, you ever seen it?
Oh, I don't watch TV, but I'll
Yeah.
have to watch it.
Well, anyway, they do build these houses and,
Yeah.
it takes a certain mindset to make that shift.
Yeah, so basically, I love tiny houses, and that's the first thing I started watching when I started getting into houses in like 6th grade. But the way that I was approaching this project is more of realistic ways to apply this to homes, and I think tiny houses would be way too big of a shift for everyone to take in our culture, and I think that, like, building more sustainably with some of the methods that I presented, would be applicable. But yeah, I love tiny homes, and I think that they are also a really good idea that I've been very interested for a long time. Like, I think my mom can attest to that. I would show her like random tiny homes that I found on the internet that I
She's
wanted
not
to
been a
live in.
fan of the last two houses we've had. Side.
Our house uses way too much
And, yeah.
heating, and it's wide and long and not efficient at all.
But it got you to Craftsbury, so
That's
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I was really intrigued by that envelope house idea. I'm sure you
Yeah.
knew about that, but
Yep,
that,
Yep.
building your house so that the angle of the summer, winter sun would
Yeah.
be appropriate sounds very
Yeah.
appealing.
And even just having like an overhang over stop hanging windows would shade in the summer and heat in the winter. But that's like taking the most advantage of that with that design.
I found the underground method very interesting because the house that I live in is like built into a hill.
Yeah.
So like the top floor is actually like the first floor where like our kitchen and stuff is.
Yeah.
And then our bedroom is on the bottom floor and it's actually like in the hill, so like it's underground. And I always like thought that our bedroom, like in the summer, it was always the coolest place to be.
Yeah.
And then like pretty like decent in the winter, not like super warm.
Yeah.
But I always just thought it was because we were like on the bottom floor rather than on the top floor, but I think it's interesting that because I'm actually like underground.
Yeah. I mean, our house is built similarly to like our living area is on the top floor and then our basement, and we're built into the hill over there. So I'd say we have kind of a
Yeah,
similar
so we don't,
experience.
it sounds like she uses her,
Yeah.
her
I know, but-
ground floor as living space.
And then a question I have is with the envelope house, would it be like built the same here in Vermont as it would be in like maybe like Florida or like even in like South America? Cause like, I mean, I could be totally wrong, but like, the sun would be like different in that,
Yeah.
between the hemispheres, right?
So depending on where you live, you would have to take into account where the sun travels. But yeah, it would be built differently in different parts of the world.
That was really interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna take the opportunity too, your mom and you, I'd like to invite you to, I've built quite a few I've built over 30 houses now.
Yeah.
And there was a fellow that lived here in Craftsbury who was way ahead of his time. And there's a house down here on Young Road, you probably run by there.
Yeah.
You know, you go down King Farm Road, you go Young Road across the bridge,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
well, right on the right, there's a house there that is owned in my family now, and it's all of what you described, and this guy was practicing. He first lived in a very small part with his wife for 10 years, and as he progressed in his career, he added on different things, and I'd love to show it to you if you're really interested, because it's really cool.
Yeah.
And I did several houses with him, and we would do things like run the rafters out, and he would have us cut them back, and then so on January 21st, the sun was hitting, it had to hit the back wall to make it accurate, you know, so it's
Yeah.
cool.
Wow.
If you're really interested, I would
Yeah.
be happy to show you sometime, and,
Yeah, that sounds cool.
cause, and that was sort of led me to, did you go see any, did you try to find any houses around, did you go to see anything?
Well, I wasn't really
COVID
moving
made it
around
hard.
too much.
COVID
I
made
did
it
go
hard.
to, I forget what it was called, but my mentor got me into this seminar thing online where they like went over some houses, and people would ask questions about them, and it was relatively sustainable houses in Vermont, but some of them were just old homes that were interesting.
Yeah, and there's another spare tire house down, do you know Nancy Van Winkle? Have
Yeah.
you met
Yeah.
Nancy?
yeah, she,
That's a spare tire house, Curtis built that, and that's a
Yeah.
earthship house, which is sort of, early on, that was the way it built in the ground using spare tires as your foundation, so it's recycling material and that's a
Is
pretty,
that the house they live in now?
what's that?
Is that the house they live in now?
Yeah,
on
Yeah,
Gateway
the Wrights
Drive.
used to live there.
Who?
The Wrights, like Griffin and Eliza,
Oh.
I think.
They used to live
They
there.
used, yeah, they used to live there, yeah, Griffith
Yeah.
did, yeah, and Lucy, and, yeah, but that's a spare tire house, and that
Yeah.
was Earthship, it was after houses like in Southwest,
Yeah.
so,
Interesting.
it's very exciting, and the other fact I was gonna tell you, which I think you sort of mentioned, but building sustainably would be far greater than having all the cars go electric,
Yeah.
because we spend so much money with all the materials and energy building them, and the heating and cooling them, that
Yeah.
the chances of saving the climate are much greater with the way we build than with making cars electric.
Yeah, because we're
So-
living in our houses more than we're driving.
Yeah, but you did a great job, it's great.
Yeah, it was very educational, and, Allison and,
Adrian,
Adrian's house, she did a
Yeah.
presentation a few years ago about the sustainable approaches they've taken in their house.
Yeah.
A lot of
their
recycled materials is one thing I
There's
remember.
Son Pastoral made some videos on YouTube that she had me watch in the beginning of the year
yeah,
Yeah.
about their house. And
that's right.
Yeah.
kind
I
of
bet he had some comments.
Oh yeah, he knew how everything works. He was pretty good at explaining it, which was
Yes.
nice.
Well, thank you very
Yeah,
much,
thank you.
Emil.
Yeah, very
Nice
good.
job.
Thank you.
And I say to all seniors, don't you have a great sense of relief? And it's,
This is my last thing this year. I finished all
Really?
my
This is
classes.
uh,
Yeah.
Wow,
time to just
and
relax.
have you been accepted somewhere, you go,
Yeah, I'm going to UVM,
Nice.
which I'm excited about.
Go
Looking forward
Cats.
to it. Yeah.
Skiing
Great.
at UVM,
I
Yeah,
am.
and she has the spot on the ski team.
yeah, isn't that
That's right.
exciting?
great
Yeah.
school, a lot of UV, a lot of catamounts around.
Both of her parents are alumni.
And two of my grandparents and a bunch of my aunts and uncles and two of my cousins.
That's great,
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
that's really good, great
Yeah.
school, great school,
Yeah, I'm excited.
excellent, excellent.
Well, thank you very
Yeah, thank
much.
you.
Yeah, thanks for being
Well,
here.
now it's time
listening.
to-
I think I have
Relax
your
a
email,
little bit.
Harry, so we,
Yeah, you should, it would be
we
really
should
fun,
reach
if you
out.
really want it, I'd love to show it to you, cause it's,
Yeah.
I worked on it for, in the beginning, and then, the last few years I've really been working on it, it'd be fun for you to see, actually.
Yeah.
We'll do that, we'll do that.
Alright.
thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Oh, really?
Was built in 1997, and everybody was like, oh, this is a really cool thing to do. Like, living in, the standard houses, it's just not cool anymore. And so minimalists actually took this and started living in tiny houses altogether, because they were just like living off the need base rather than, the luxuries of the world. Yep, so the tinier, the better was actually a saying that minimalists use a lot, because they would take like all of their belongings and just be like, okay, what do I really need? Because you can only fit so much in a tiny house. So their hobby proved that it is really possible to live small, so why not live sufficiently? So this is an up-close picture. This is called a bolt house, because it is frames of metal put together, and then it's all just bolted, and then it's got like wood framing, obviously. But so this is the blueprints of it, but it's digitalized, and I thought this was really cool when I came upon it, because I was looking up, how to do quick, easy blueprints. Turns out I am terrible at it. So here's a video where it goes through the 3 different kinds of blueprints that you should have for a tiny house. But they definitely did it with a computer program, and I'd love to know actually what program they used. It's Arch Structure, I think. But I really thought it was really cool. We went over something like this, similar to this, in my economics class 2 years ago. And we built tree houses with our blueprints. And I thought it was just really cool. I'm gonna have to look at these numbers. So, according to the state of homelessness in America in 2017, there were 553,742 homeless people in America. And to me, that is just ridiculous. Because as a country, we should really work a lot harder to make sure that that doesn't happen. And there's actually been in Louisiana, I don't remember the town name, but they've been taking like shed-sized tiny houses and making homes out of them. And there's like rows and rows of them. And they you know, have a bed, they have a place to cook, and they don't like have bathrooms in them, and that's okay, you know? Something is better than nothing when you have nothing. So according to some of the most recent estimates, which is not from January of 2017, but that's what this is from, because this same website actually does updates every year, and it's really cool to look at the chart. Now that I think about it, I definitely should have got one, about how the numbers rise and fall throughout the months of the year. And like in the wintertime, you see it drop tremendously because there are like all kinds of places that be like, okay, well, we don't want these people freezing to death on the street. So like with the pandemic, we saw hotels were opening up their rooms to homeless people so that they weren't on the streets, because it's not safe. So 17 people out of every 10,000 experience homelessness. And in 2017, the homelessness rate was actually a lot lower than it was in 2007, where it was skyrocketed over 600,000 people. And that's like 12,500 school buses full of people. Imagine just all the way through Casbury, it's just buses full of homeless people. And to put it in perspective when you really think about it, because you know, when you think about like a random number of people, it doesn't give you as good of an idea, but when you think about school buses, they're huge. They can fit like 70 people on a bus. It's ridiculous, and it's heartbreaking. So substance abuse is a really big contributor to homelessness, because it once you start using, you become addicted to it, and that becomes your main focus and your main need. Everything else is completely irrelevant when you just need to like have that one thing. And so it's estimated that about 38% of homeless people are alcohol dependent, and 26% are dependent on other dangerous chemicals, which, you know, that's really wide variety, because you hear all the time about like the war on drugs, when, you know, if it was a real war on drugs, we would have actually gotten rid of it. So the National Coalition for Homelessness came up with these statistics, which, you know, they might not be 100% accurate, because there's always the people that you don't know about. There are so many people suffering with things like this that can just keep it hidden and it's okay, but it's not. So it actually gets worse when it's affected when it affects the people that you love and the people who love you, and they have to continue to watch you fall down this path. I myself actually have watched so many people just like throw their lives away because they become so addicted to one thing that they'll fall apart right in front of you, and you'll never even be able to watch them come back. It also harms our economy, which is terrible, because the less people that are working and the more people commit crimes, it's just horrible. Terrible timing. So recovery. Rebuilding somebody's life in this country is always revolving around money, and I really feel like it shouldn't be like that. If you have a person in your hand, you shouldn't look about what can I benefit from helping this person? How can I gain something from helping this person? Rather than looking at them and seeing like, how can I help this person? How can I make it easier to be alive for this person? And it is really heartbreaking to know that like, if you can't afford to live in an apartment, then you're not going to live anywhere. If you cannot afford to eat, then you're not going to eat. Rather than having somebody step up and be like, okay, well, this is an issue and we need to take care of it. And there are so many ways that we really could take care of it. We just choose not to. So economic efficiency is a huge milestone in recovery, and that's another big piece of the self-sufficient and economically efficient tiny house, because when you have a place to live where you have to work to take care of it, you have to do the grunt work. But it's, once you reach that point of sufficiency, it's not, you don't have to worry about it anymore. This is yours. Yeah, so like finally deciding to turn your life around is such a hard thing to do as is without the stress of the entire world on your shoulders, because stress and anxiety is a whole nother reason to go back to using, because drugs and alcohol numb that. So if you want to recover from things like that, adding more onto your plate is not going to help at all with your recovery process. So off-grid living comes in hand with no utility bills or low utility bills. So some pros are people. If you don't like people, you don't have to deal with people. You can be by yourself and you can take care of yourself, and you don't have to depend on other people once you've reached that point of, you know, isolation. Like me. Isolation. Utilities. Your utility bills are very low once you're off-grid because you are independent from the power grid, you're independent from the water grid. You take care of yourself, whether you run your home on solar panels or wind turbines, or, you know, if you have a river that you've figured out how to create a dam with that generates your home, or even just a regular gas generator that you, in the video we're going to watch, they actually run their house off of, gas from animals, which I can't name right now. So investment. It's actually, you'll see it's in the pro and cons because it's a huge investment to live off the grid. They actually make it really hard to be independent from these big companies. They make it really difficult on purpose because all of these big companies fund the rest of the world. They pay taxes, they pay huge amounts of this, that, or the other thing into the government. And so they make it really hard to not have to depend on them. In a lot of places, actually, it is pretty impossible to have solar panels on apartment buildings in the city if you don't own that apartment building. Like, they won't let you put them up. So you just are continuously having to be dependent on the grid because you just can't get out of it. So another pro is staying independent and in control. You control what happens. If you decide, you know what, I don't really have enough time to, you know, buy another battery, and this battery only holds so much power. I am just gonna sit over here by candlelight and read a book. You can have every ounce of control over that. You can't be like, oh, my fridge is plugged in, and my alarm clock is plugged in, and my TV is still plugged in, and all these things are sucking up power from the grid, raising my bill. You can choose to just shove it all off. And it's done. So it's also eco-friendly to live off-grid, because like I said, you're free from fossil fuels. You are not burning any of that if you have a solar panel, which is actually, it's kind of a win-lose situation because although solar panels are really good at, you know, keeping you free from fossil fuels, when they are broken and done and they go to landfills, they have really harmful little sand chips in them that make the glass are toxic. Like when they start breaking down or they just sit there, they're made with toxic things, even though they're like, oh yeah, buy these, they're great for the environment. When they work. When they stop working, they're just as harmful as everything else. Same with car batteries. Save on gas. You buy an electric car. They don't ever tell you what's in those batteries that's killing our environment. Because they don't want you to know. It's good for the environment. So buy it. it's expensive. High initial costs. That's a con when you have no money for high initial costs. So it really would take a really big investment from people who can afford it to help the people who can't. Winter heating. So in the video we're gonna watch at the end, they're like, well, we haven't been doing this through a winter. They're in the mountains of Colorado. That's gonna be dangerous. So, there's a lot of things is poor planning. If you do not plan for the bad things that are gonna happen, then you're not gonna be ready for the bad things that are gonna happen. And so really, really just gotta be ready for it. So yeah, living off-grid can have a lot of benefits, but it can also, have a really bad downside if you are not planning properly. If you only buy one solar panel and expect to run all of these things off of this one solar panel that's charging this one small 12-volt battery that's only going to do so much throughout the day, poor planning. So you got to do research. So some global benefits of living off-grid and how it's good for the environment is your carbon footprint is greatly reduced. Like, so much. And that is actually what our world needs. And we talk about it a little bit here in Vermont, where we have Efficiency Vermont, which will actually help you get solar panels. They will install them on your house. And they will be like, yeah,